3.
Muy buenas noches, miembros de la Organización Mundial de Ciudades y Plataformas Logísticas y todos los participantes al foro virtual. En esta noche vamos a presentarles un tema bastante interesante y de mucho auge en este momento: logística inversa, generación de nuevas inversiones. Esta etapa la vamos a hacer en inglés, ya que tenemos panelistas de la Universidad de Arizona. So I would like to welcome right now Mr. Dale Rogers and Zach Rogers from United States. Our theme today is going to be reverse logistics, new inversion generation. For now, we have Zach Rogers, who is a supply chain management professor from the College of Business at Colorado State University, and Mr. Dale Rogers, that is also a professor on supply chain on the ON Semiconductor, WP Carey School of Business in Arizona State University. So to start our panel today, Zach, what would you, or how would you define reverse logistics?
Let me, I actually have a definition I should put up on the screen here. And we're fortunate in that this definition was actually written by Padre Rogers over here. And essentially what it says is that reverse logistics is the act of planning, implementing, and controlling the efficient, cost-effective flow of raw materials, in-process inventory, finished goods, related information, so it's not just physical, it's also the informational part of this, from the point of consumption back to the point of origin for the purpose of recapturing value or proper disposal. And so essentially, Dora, what we're saying here is there's a lot of goods that maybe get to the customer. Maybe it's purchased by the customer, maybe it just gets to the store where the customer sees it on the shelf and decides, oh, this isn't what I want. But all of that has to come back eventually, whether it's from the customer back to the retailer, maybe from the retailer back to the manufacturer, or any combination of that. It's goods essentially coming backwards. And, you know, we spend so much time thinking about how we push goods forward. You know, I teach in a university in a school of business, and probably 95% of what we think about is how do we push goods toward the customers? How do we get people to buy stuff? But increasingly, it's becoming more and more important to think about, well, what happens if somebody doesn't buy it? Or if they buy it and then decide they don't want it anymore? You know, the idea around what returns are and return policies at companies and whether it's okay to return things and how often you can return something has gotten more and more sort of liberalized over the last 20 years, 30 years. And now, you know, returns are really as big of a part of, as much of a part of the business, I think, as sort of pushing goods forward. It's really a key element to almost any successful company. And but you know, I'm not the one who wrote the definition. So, Dan, if you have anything that you want to add to what reverse logistics is?
Now, Mr. Dale, what would you say that has pushed the reverse logistics? Is it the e-commerce? Is it all those, is it more in the retail industry, or you have seen this phenomenon in many industries? And which countries are the most used to have this type of logistics? What would you say that it's the main trigger that has been pushing us, Zach says, the reverse logistics?
Well, you know, the idea really is a really old idea. And there's a story I love. J.C. Penney, which is a big American retailer, was a big American retailer. They're in deep trouble now, but for much of the 20th century, they were a really powerful retailer. and Sears and Roebuck, then Sears, and that includes Kmart now, and they were both. Well, Sears was late 19th century, early 20th century, and they both became really big, strong, powerful retailers for a long time. You know, they're not doing that well anymore, but they had two elements that they think really propelled them forward. You know, Penny's started as a very small general store in Kemmerer, Wyoming. Kemmerer, Wyoming is a very, very small town. And I've actually been to what they call the mother store, which is the first store there. And it's this really tiny town, basically one street. And they started there with two innovations. One was cash and carry. So most stores at the time, you know, you put the stuff you bought on a tab, and then at the end of the month you'd pay that bill. And Penny's understood cash flow, and so you paid and then you could leave the store. So it's this general store. The other thing, though, that was the big innovation that really carried Penny's forward in the early 20th century, like around 1908, maybe it was 1912, I think, was this innovation of no hassle returns, where they wouldn't ask you any questions. They'd take the thing back, because what they knew was that a customer for life is better than a customer for one transaction. And if you could remove risk from the consumer and transfer it to the store, you probably would have a customer for life. And so, so the cost of a return wasn't nearly as important as the cost of sort of a customer for a lifetime. And that innovation really is what built a lot of US retailing. You know, typical return rates for a lot of the 20th century, even into the 21st century, was around 6% at retail. And in 1950, there was a retailer that was based in Atlanta. It was a department store. I think it's now part of Macy's now, called Rich's Department Stores. And they were really proud of the fact in 1950, they had a 12% return rate instead of 6%, because that said to them that they were really taking care of their customers. So returns have been part of U.S. retail, not part of outside of U.S. so much, but part of U.S. retail for more than 100 years. However, the management of the return process and what happens to those things once they're being returned, the movement of obsolete inventory at the retailer or at the brand owner, one tier upstream from the retailer, is also a relatively new thing. And in the US, and not just in the US, but certainly it's the most developed in the US, is this incredible infrastructure that manages return merchandise, overstock merchandise, and finds another home for it. We call that the secondary market. And so you're seeing the secondary market in the US be about the same size as e-commerce. So e-commerce has been tremendously important. E-commerce returns aren't always higher than brick and mortar returns, but they normally are. And I think Zach has a slide about the e-commerce effect, right?
Yeah. So Dory, you asked a minute ago, is e-commerce driving this? And it, to some extent, yes. And it's really something that has increased lately. You know, one of the things that we're talking about here, I think is to bring awareness to the size of the secondary market. And as we just mentioned, it's huge. The secondary market was actually bigger than e-commerce in the US last year. Now that might change possibly this year because of some factors, but e-commerce directly impacts the secondary market. And that's because in the secondary market, we tend to see, in e-commerce, we tend to see a return rate 2 to 3 times higher than we do with traditional brick and mortar retail. And it's growing at a rate right now that kind of looks like this. So you see, I put on the screen here, this is an article from February. US e-commerce went up 15% in 2019. Well, you know, great. We thought it was gonna be about 15% again. And then you look, it's the same reporter, Jessica Young, 6 months later wrote, oh, it went up 44% in the second quarter. And it's gonna be closer to 50% probably in Q4. And that's because, you know, we can't go to stores anymore, or we can't go to as many stores as we used to. And so we're sort of ordering everything online. And, you know, it's one of these things where, you know, if you look at, you know, the return rate, right? It's about 3 times higher for e-commerce versus brick and mortar. And if you look at things like demand for warehouses or, you know, demand for trucks, and this is from this green and yellow graph here. This is from this month's Logistics Managers Index, which we put out every month, and be happy to share with anybody watching this video. You can see that for downstream firms, so retailers essentially, warehousing capacity and transportation capacity is at really low levels, and levels that are significantly lower than they would be for upstream firms. And just for anybody looking at this graph here, the yellow and green one, any number below 50 means contraction. Any number above 50 means expansion. It's a change index. We interview a bunch of folks for it every month. And so you can see there's contraction everywhere in terms of capacity. But it's worse if you're downstream, and that's because e-commerce puts a really big strain on, do we have the trucks to make these returns? Do we have the facilities? And for a long time, companies didn't want to dedicate a ton of space to return, because returns have been thought of for a long time as a money loser. And that's not so much the case anymore. I know when I was working in a warehouse of a very big retailer, very big online retailer, my boss would take me around in his golf cart and say, you know, he'd just see all the returns. He'd be like, get rid of that, get rid of that, get rid of that. It's costing us money. And it was really thought of as a cost center. Today, and we're going to show you some numbers for it in a second, returns is really more of a profit center because you can actively make money now utilizing the secondary market. And again, it's just like you mentioned a second ago, it's because this infrastructure has really been developed in the United States and continues to develop in the United States. Just though before Dora, I saw you had a question a second ago. So I just, one thing I did want to say on the slide, you'll notice in the corner here, I made a little graph showing the sales for all the big, you know, online e-commerce holidays for the last 5 years. And if you can see the growth has been, you know, pretty steady, but increasing quickly for the last 5 years. And then you'll notice we go from 2019 to 2020 and we see just an amazing jump. And this was last week. China had, you know, Singles Day. I guess it was about 2 weeks ago at this point. There was Singles Day. And they went from 38 billion in 2019 to 75 billion in 2020. So it essentially doubled. And again, think about that returns rate. If the returns rate is double or triple what it is for brick and mortar, and we have things like Singles Day jumping up by 100%, think about what that's going to do to returns and just the flood of goods coming back. We don't know. You'll see we don't have a little purple bar for 2020 yet. And that's because we don't know what will happen for Black Friday and Cyber Monday in the US this year. We're going to find out this weekend, actually. I'll send you a new graph when we know.
Definitely.
But, you know, the point remains, returns is going up, you know, with e-commerce, and e-commerce is up 50% this year. You know, and it was a trend that was happening already, but now it's really happening. And the pandemic, I think, is just acting as a giant engine that's sort of, you know, okay, we're supposed to grow by 15%, instead it's 50. If you talk to companies, essentially they're saying, you know, we're 3 years ahead, 4 years ahead, 5 years ahead of where we thought we would be because the pandemic has sped us up so quickly. There's a famous quote from Vladimir Lenin, who I would imagine doesn't get quoted in a lot of business panels, but he says there will be decades where nothing happens, and then there's weeks where decades happen. And essentially what that means is change happens very, very quickly. And I think you could probably tell from looking at that graph on the bottom there, that we're in a period of really, really rapid change, and that's going to have a huge impact on rates of return.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And that was one of my questions. What were your expectations for the holiday? I mean, definitely that it's going to be this year, I would say, I mean, it's going to be huge. Now, also from both of your speeches, you also talk, and part of the definition was the cost effective. Okay, you say that it's not a loss anymore. It's seen as a cost effective, and it can generate profit to the company, to the manufacturer, to the company. How would you say, or how do you explain what are those, or how would they get those profits? Will they do, what they do is with the returns, they will put them back into sales, or only to that secondary market, or they will do like this special events to get that out? How is the returns, like boxes, labeling, and things like that, being handled to get the return back? And what about, I mean, yes, there's a lot of costs in the process, because usually if the return is, the company will be taking over that cost. So could you, both of you, tell us where can we see that cost effective as a company, not as a customer? And I see that logistics, in this case, the reverse logistics is more customer oriented, 100%.
Well, Zach's got a great slide here. This is a picture of Amazon's return facility. What city is that in?
This is in it's in Kentucky. I can't remember the city off the top of my head.
Yeah, it's Kentucky, and you know, has this open returns. Will take everything back. Has that worked for Amazon? Well, the richest man in the world is Jeff Bezos from Amazon. So I think a pretty good takeaway would be, yeah, it's working out pretty well, actually. So Amazon will take anything back, and they have a rather elaborate way that they handle that return merchandise. Some of it goes back into inventory. You know, interestingly, clothes can go back into inventory. Others stuff goes back into one of the many where Amazon other stores, Woot.com, the warehouse deals stuff. There's several of those places just inside Amazon. The other thing they'll do is if it doesn't seem very likely that they want to handle it, and sometimes they will say to a supplier, look, your stuff isn't selling that fast. Get it out of here. And the supplier will say, we don't want it back. So just liquidate it however you can. And Amazon will sell it to a third party who will then auction it off. So they have many different many routes out of you know, whether it's obsolete inventory or it is consumer returns or some other kind of product that they're phasing out. And, you know, they believe in having fresh product available and not keeping the old stuff around. And so what retailers have done, also brand owners that aren't retailers, like Nike and Adidas and a furniture store, brand. All of those folks have developed really pretty complex reverse logistics chains to move that stuff from one place to another. The other thing.
Here's a picture of the complexity, by the way.
Okay.
If this would help you explain it.
Yeah, so I actually originally made this chart.
Mm-hmm.
I was an expert witness in a federal criminal case, and I used this chart to help the defendant actually not get convicted. It was kind of the first version of this, and it was to show that the return supply chains are very complex. So, if something starts to the retailer, the first thing they want to do is return it to the vendor, who's the manufacturer, the brand owner. It can go to all these outlets, such as factory outlet stores, both in the U.S. and in Mexico, and I haven't been to Central America, so I don't know if they exist down there. But factory outlets are stores. I remember one of the first ones I ever went to was in Tijuana, Mexico, in the mid '80s, with Zach's mom, and there was this huge factory outlet mall where you could buy Ralph Lauren polo and some other big brands, Tommy Hilfiger, I think, of stuff that wasn't selling very quickly. So they moved it to this sort of early beginning factory outlet mall in Tijuana, probably around '86. I think Zach's mom might have even been pregnant with him at the time, and that was one of the first factory outlet malls I ever saw, and they've spread like wildfire throughout the U.S. We've got auctions, such as eBay is the most famous one, but there's several other ones. And then a pretty elaborate salvage dealer network, where there's this whole infrastructure of salvage dealers. Now, interestingly, maybe to your listeners, some of the biggest and most important salvage dealers are Panamanian companies. For some reason, and I don't actually know the reason, Panama is a place that's become very good at dispositioning product that's been for sale somewhere else in the Americas, quite often the U.S. or Canada, and is part of this elaborate secondary market flows. The reason why there's 3 salvage dealers in the red there is because that's pretty typical. You can have up to 10 levels where stuff keeps getting resold, but it's very typical that stuff will be sold 3 times in the salvage dealer network. So that's why that's on there. Dollar stores, and of course, dollar stores are the fastest growing type of retailer in the U.S. They're also growing very quickly in some countries in Latin America. Value retailers like TJ Maxx and Ross's and Marshall's and Home Goods, charities, flea markets. Those are sort of the last one you want to do, is flea markets and pawn shops. And then if nothing else works, you might recycle the product and break it down to its components. Sometimes there's a business reason to do that as well. And the very, very, very last resort is putting product in landfills. And one of the things that's really changed over the, I don't know, nearly 30 years, 27, 28 years I've been studying reverse logistics, is it's much less likely that product that didn't sell very well or was returned will go to landfills. There really has been built this infrastructure where you can liquidate product and you can get money for it. I mean, and if you think about it, factory outlet stores are generally more profitable than selling the product through a department store. Well, you say, well, Dale, how is that possible? Well, think about Ralph Lauren polo selling their product through a Macy's or a Dillard's or a Nordstrom's versus selling it in that factory outlet mall in Tijuana, Mexico. Well, they're probably going to get about 70% of the retail price at the factory outlet mall in Tijuana. Usually that's the goal, at least for most brand owners, would be about 70% of the retail price. If they sell it to Macy's or Nordstrom's, who's going to get a 50% of the retail price because they're basically a wholesaler selling to the retailer. But if they sell through their own factory outlet, their brick and mortar outlet, they're getting 70% probably. And you know, the cost of the store and the employees in Tijuana, Mexico, is not that high. So that actually can be more profitable. And for companies like Polo and several others, Bass Shoes now is mostly selling product through outlets. Coach Leather has really ramped up their outlets, and it's really more important than their stores. And the retailers have followed suit. So a company like Nordstrom's has seen a decline in their mall stores in the U.S. in some ways, a number of mall stores, and they actually have more Nordstrom racks, which is their. Oh yeah, here's Zach. I'll let you talk about this.
Right. So what he's referring to here is taking control of your secondary market, and it's something that we've seen firms really doing as they've seen this value in returns. So, you know, I mentioned how my boss used to be, and essentially we would just give everything to salvage dealer. It was just, just get this out of here. I don't want to see it anymore. And so we'd give it to a salvage dealer and get a few pennies for every dollar. Nordstrom's sort of saw all of these returns happening. And a lot of times what happened is something wouldn't sell at Nordstrom, and then it would go to a value retailer. And a value retailer could be a store like TJ Maxx or Ross or you know, Big Lot, you know, something like that in the United States. And value retailers, just like you were saying, are much lower cost, but they were growing really, really quickly because essentially consumers became trained to think, okay, I could pay $100 for this shirt if I get it at a Nordstrom, or in 3 months when they get rid of all the summer clothes and bring the fall clothes in, I can go to TJ Maxx and get it for $40. And so it was sort of becoming this thing where the only way for these big department stores to really make sales was to have a whole bunch of sales. And so Nordstrom realized the real growth in you know, mid to mid high-end apparel is in the secondary market piece. And so they came up with a store called Nordstrom Rack. And Nordstrom Rack is essentially their clearance outlet. So this picture here on the bottom, this is a traditional Nordstrom. It's nice, there's a lot of space, it's well lit, everything's spread out. This is a fun place to walk around on, you know, a few days before Christmas and pick out some nice sunglasses, right? The picture on the top is a Nordstrom Rack. This is less fun. I mean, it's fun in some ways, but I mean, they just pack as much inventory into this space as they can. You know, bright, you know, fluorescent lights. This is more, you're going here and it's less about the experience and more about the product. And you know, there's some experience, you know, maybe there's the treasure hunt piece of it where you're like, oh, I can find anything here. And so that part of it's kind of fun. But really it's about, look, people want to get good deals on clothes and we can handle returns and things like that, you know, cheaper because the cost structure is different. And so if you look at, you know, the way that Nordstrom Rack has grown as an important piece of their business, you'll see in 2010, when they started doing this, you know, it was nothing. It was just a tiny piece of their business. If you go forward a few years, you can see that orange bar really creeping up on that blue bar. And today, there's actually over 100 more Nordstrom Racks than there are traditional Nordstrom. And so this, I think, shows kind of the sea change that's happening here, where companies are realizing the real growth is not necessarily in traditional retail. The real growth is in sort of the secondary market area. And let me show you exactly what the growth is here in the secondary market. So this is a chart that we've been tracking since 2008. So you can see this goes from 2008 to 2019. And this is the size of the secondary market in the United States, although there's probably some international. The secondary market, it's hard to put a border around it because stuff might go back and forth to Mexico or Central America or places like that. But you can see in 2008, when we started tracking this, and this is made up of all of those, that big web of pictures we showed you at the beginning with salvagers, value retailers, dollar stores, all that. All of that is included in here. So this is essentially returned or unsold goods. What is the value of the goods passing through all these secondary channels? In 2008, it was about $310 billion. In 2019, you can see it's $630 billion. If $630 billion sounds like a lot of money, you are correct. It is approximately 3% of US GDP. When we started doing this and it was going up, and because this was like my first job in college was finding these numbers for him. Before I was also Dr. Rogers, when I was just Zach, the research assistant. We thought maybe this was going up because it was a recession and people were turning more towards alternate channels to save money. Well, the recession ended and the secondary market kept going up around 8-9% every year because people didn't just forget, hey, I can get a good deal at the outlet mall or at the value retailer. And so they kept going there. And companies realized that they could make money pushing goods through. And so it's now 3% of GDP. And it's more than we spend on education, transportation, agriculture, Homeland Security, Medicare combined, but more than all of that put together. In fact, in 2019, e-commerce in the United States was $568 billion, $45 billion less than the value of the goods in the secondary market. So early on, we were talking about, oh man, e-commerce, it's growing, it's still fast. This is growing faster. The secondary market, which is directly related to e-commerce, of course, is actually bigger and is growing faster than e-commerce was. And a lot of what this is driven by is all the stuff we were just talking about. Inventory is turning over more quickly, right? Amazon wants everything to be fresh. Mm-hmm. Stores, with places like Zara, for instance, which has grown so quickly. That's a store where if you walk in today and then you walk in 2 weeks, everything in that whole store is different. The same with the value retailer. Value retailers, dollar stores, they try to turn everything over in a month. And so that's very different than what it used to be. Also, we've been trained by being able to shop online to think, well, I should be able to get this shirt in any color, in any size, with buttons or zip, in anything. And so companies have had to have a really wide selection of goods, which means they have to carry more SKUs, which means more things are going to go unsold or be returned. And then it's also driven by the fact that in a lot of these outlets, you can get something like a shirt or a pair of shoes or whatever for a lower price because it's in a secondary channel.
Okay. Now, Zach, one more question or comment on this. Okay, so the secondary market has grown a lot on the last 10 years, if we see here on this graph. Okay, that's definitely one thing. Now, outlet mall or an outlet store doesn't mean less quality or something damaged, because it used to be like that way of thinking way back ago. Now, and you mentioned it, it is very common within the US. I mean, you see Pennsylvania, you see Orlando, those are part of the most popular outlets that a lot of people go to. But have you thought, or is there any policy or any company that has think to move their inventories for a secondary market outside the US? And what industries, like in the case of industries or, I don't know, manufacturing, one of the manufacturers, like any spare parts or things like that? Is that something that it's going on right now? It's also
yeah, definitely. Actually, there was a great book written probably 20, maybe more than 20 years ago by now, called Salula, and it was a sociologist at Northwestern University that studied the clothing trade in Africa, the used clothing trade, and mostly it was fed by Europeans, truthfully, because the U.S. is a long ways from Africa. As I said a few minutes ago, there is a lot of movement of excess product and returns into Latin America and specifically Central America, you know, and Panama, with several really innovative businesses developing down there, have become great brokers of product that it didn't make sense to sell in the U.S. So there's sort of a stratification within the secondary market where factory outlet malls are generally the highest quality, but you know, you have to think about how much stuff you can put through a factory outlet mall. There's a limited amount, and it could be that you have way too many of chartreuse blazer, men's blazer that nobody wanted to buy, that for some reason a merchandiser thought was a good idea. And so maybe you put some of those through the factory outlet store, but then you use other places to send that to. And in many cases, if it's a really massive amount, there'll be a salvage dealer that will move some of that into Latin America or like Mexico or Honduras or Panama. It's interesting. One of the things that we've seen and probably a lot of the members of OMCPL know about is the use of maquiladoras as refurbishers for product. One of the early stories that I put in the reverse logistics book that Ron Lemke and I wrote back in the 90s, late 90s, was a story about Hallmark cards, where they'd bring the Hallmark cards down to El Paso, move them across the border to Juarez, and they had a you know, sort of a returns factory there where they had like, it was mostly women that worked in it, and they'd have irons, they'd be ironing the card. So if you think about it, the day after Easter or after Mother's Day, in all of those card shops in the US, you don't need Mother's Day cards the week after Mother's Day. So they would box those up, they'd send them to Laredo, take them across the border to Juarez, and refurbish greeting cards, which at the time, back in whenever I ran across that, 97 or 98 or something, I was so surprised that you could afford to refurbish, remanufacture cards. Well, if you can do that for cards, obviously you're going to do it for electronics or a lot of different kinds of products. And so some of that across the border business that I know you guys, I know Hector is very familiar with, some of those maquilas, has really been to support remanufacturing and refurbishment of products. Some of that stuff might come back to the US, but a lot of it is circulated through other places in the Americas, such as Honduras and Guatemala and certainly Panama. And so there's a very elaborate set of businesses that are in Central America that act as an important part of the reverse logistics flow and the secondary markets. Now, a lot of times the product doesn't stay in Central America. It will be re-exported out. That's one of the reasons why Panama is strategic there. But we have seen a fair amount of that certainly develop in the last 25 years.
Okay, well, it's almost time to start closing. So I got one more thing. You mentioned about recycling those Hallmark cards and a few years ago. Okay, how do we link, or I mean, in the return of the product, there's more boxes, more documentation being done. How is the logistics, the reverse logistics, linked to the go green, or being more friendly with the environment?
Well, the most important thing it does is keep things out of the landfills. So, you know, we have $631 billion in the US of return goods going through the secondary market. 40 years ago, that might be $600 billion of stuff going into a landfill that we just throw away. And so what it does is extends the product life cycle. And so if you think about the life cycle of a product, you think about cradle to grave engineering, what a lot of companies are focused on now as part of that cradle to grave engineering is how do we keep this out of a landfill? How do we make returns happen? And what we're finding is that it's actually pretty profitable to keep things out of a landfill. You know, I'm sure a lot of folks in the audience have one of these in their pocket, an iPhone, or any kind of smartphone. But you know, Apple, they want you to bring the phones back to them. They don't want these to just end up in a trash heap somewhere where, you know, someone's going to take a picture of a little kid trying to pull the gold or the copper out of them. That'd be bad PR. But also, Apple would like to pull their own gold and copper out of these things. You know, I think last year they pulled more than like 2,000 pounds of gold out of old phones, which runs at about $40 to $50 million of value that they got just from pulling these out of the phones. And so, you know, keeping it out of a landfill, that's good, that's green, but also it's profitable. And so really what this has become, you can kind of think about it as a way for firms to monetize what used to be thought of as waste. And so yes, there is more boxes involved, there's trucks involved, and certainly there's emissions. But you know, it also keeps things from being thrown away. And so I think in terms of you know, the impact on the environment, this sort of returns revolution and the change in the structure of disposition which it caused has ultimately probably been good for the environment.
Okay, so for now, from all your speeches, you will say now that reverse is the new logistics then?
Well, I don't think you have a complete logistics capability without reverse logistics. I mean, I think it's not necessarily the new logistics, partly because it's kind of old in many places. It's just something that's been neglected by a lot of firms until the last several years. But I don't think you have a very good logistics function unless you're managing reverse logistics. And the other thing is that you really need to know where that stuff that's leaking out of your forward logistics system, where is it going? You know, are you kind of creating your own competitors? And really you should be engaging in that. That's certainly what Apple, the story that Zach just told, Apple used to not want to be involved in that. And then they realized, wait a minute, there's a lot of people making money off of old Apple phones. We better get involved and we better tighten that up a little bit. And that's been something that a lot of companies have done. So I don't think you have a very good logistics function in 2020 or 2021 if you don't have a robust reverse logistics capability.
Okay. Now, your final comments on as a closure, what would you recommend, or what would be the scope for the rest of the year and for 2021? What are your expectations on this matter and on the logistics? Now, with also linking that to the new vaccine that is coming out, how is that going to affect us in the logistics process?
So we're going to have the biggest e-commerce Q4 we've ever had. And we do every year. We always have the biggest e-commerce Q4, but this one really will be but by an order of magnitude. You know, instead of going up 15%, we'll go up 50%. What that means is there's going to be a lot more returns in the system. Last year, after Christmas and the holidays, there was approximately $100 billion of returns in the U.S. Those basically generated by Black Friday, Cyber Monday, Christmas, all that. This year, that could be $150 billion. And so there's going to just be a huge volume of returns moving through the system. Now, on top of that, right when those returns are moving through, it's going to be, or like you just very astutely pointed out, we're going to be moving the vaccine as well. And the vaccine is going to take up a ton of space. Now, it'll be a slightly different space because the vaccine has to be refrigerated. I mean, I think the Pfizer drug has to be at negative 70 degrees Celsius to move around, which is a lot of ice, I think, and a lot of dry ice to move that around. And yeah, and it's going to have to go internationally as well, right? So it's a lot of it will come out of the U.S. and then it's got to go all over the world, and it's got to go to places, maybe that are very rural or underdeveloped, like let's say a rural part of Africa, for instance. There's not going to be a big cold chain in place there. So I think what we're going to see actually is some logistics infrastructure be propped up, possibly by governments to distribute all this. And so governments, I think we're going to see an investment in warehouses, trucking, other transportation infrastructure that we're going to use for the vaccine. And then it's not like we're going to, okay, now tear those warehouses down or tear the highways down. I think maybe some of that infrastructure will stick around, and we might actually end up using it to help us soak up this additional 50% that we just jumped in e-commerce. So in some ways, I think there's going to be huge stress, like right now, and then for the next 6 months, the next year. But I'm hopeful that firms are really seeing the value of quick distribution, easy returns, efficient processing, and really will continue to invest in the necessary infrastructure that we need to make that happen.
Thank you. Dale, your comments?
Well, I think that if anybody is interested in learning more about reverse logistics, there's a lot of stuff they can read. And in fact, if Hector wants it, I'd be happy to let him have a PDF version of my reverse logistics book just to give away to the membership.
Thank you.
If you guys want that, you're welcome to it. It's funny, it's 20 years old, but it just was translated into Chinese. Well, it's being translated. It has been translated Chinese. It's going to start selling in China right after the beginning of next year, and it's a 20-year-old book. So it's been downloaded over 60,000 times, and I've been giving it away for years. So anybody wants it, they're welcome to it. I really think that this is an interesting time. We're seeing a very robust fourth quarter economy. Now, it could be that, quite often the recovery from a bad event like this virus or the recession 10 years ago, the recovery was often quite worse than the recession. And it could be that the recovery from this pandemic will actually be worse. But everything we're seeing right now shows growing economies. And this is a great time for companies to really get their house in order to prepare for a continuous growing economy, because that's what at least that's what it appears to be now. Could be we're going to have some hits in 2021, but it looks like things are really a go. And part of really preparing for the future is having, as we said earlier, a really robust reverse logistics function that's an important sort of utility within your supply chain organization.
Because even if there are hits, the underlying facets that are causing reverse logistics to grow, right? It's a feedback loop with customer expectations. So customer expectations have changed, right? We're going to be able to get stuff pretty affordably. We'll be able to get whatever we want, like the idea of the infinite shelf. We can get anything we want. I can open up my phone and type in anything and find it. That there will be new stuff available for us. And again, that's what a lot of these secondary dealers are going. They're turning over quickly. And that returns will be very, very convenient, right? It'll be easy. When I don't want this, I can take it back to the store. I can put it in a mailbox. I can take it to the UPS store. I can take it anywhere, and it'll go back to wherever I need it. Because those expectations increase, reverse logistics capabilities have to keep getting better. Because reverse logistics capabilities keep getting better, customer expectations keep going up. And so we're seeing this sort of positive feedback loop, I believe, where because we're getting better at returns and dealing with all these goods, customers expect that we're going to keep getting better. And so even if, yeah, the economy slows down, if you look at all these little purple dots here, are consumers going to accept less convenience? Probably not. Are they going to stop expecting to be able to get whatever they want whenever they want it on the internet? Probably not. Are they going to start expecting to not have low prices? Probably not. And so all of these sort of changing customer expectations kind of move together to force companies to be better. And I can't see a world where the expectations for what a real, good firm's reverse logistics operations look like are going to go down anytime soon. So underlying all of this, and this maybe goes back to your last question, reverse logistics is logistics. You can't have a real logistics function for your firm without having reverse logistics. And it's because the customers won't let you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Well, as always, it's a pleasure to be talking with you too. Lots of learning. I mean, we will need probably more than 2 hours to keep going and going. There's so many questions and so interesting always your KPIs and the information you provide us. So as for now, part of the conclusions overall will be this new, it's not a new area as Del said, but it's a way that the companies must focus on also on reverse logistics, and it's customer oriented, cost effective, and there is a new economy area in countries that will apply that will develop more income and more opportunities to keep growing. So thank you very much to both of you, and happy holidays, happy Thanksgiving, and see you next time.
Well, gracias and buenas noches to everybody.
Gracias y gracias a todos nuestros participantes en este foro. Agradecemos que sus preguntas las envíen a través del correo que está en la pantalla. Muchísimas gracias por muchas gracias por su participación.